So last night it was reported by Marcelo that Baker has become the front runner on this position, and we'll talk to Marcelo here in a couple of minutes. It also really it aligns with a lot of what we've heard during this time of Cory Raymond being a legitimate candidate as the defensive backs replacement for potentially Kerry Cooks and Robert Steeples, but specifically the cornerbacks coach and Robert Steeples. Raymond's name has been floated around for the past couple of weeks of potential guys that could step in here and be on the staff, going forward. And it would make a lot of sense if Baker was the DC and Raymond was the DB's coach because of the familiarity that they both have for one another. Obviously, they were on that 21 staff together and have worked alongside one another, historically. So they have some understanding of, kind of who one another is. So, we've continued to hear Raymond's name as a guy that is going to be a part of this staff at some point. And if Baker was to be the DC and those two, kind of joining together, it would make it it would make a ton of sense.
Yeah, once you start putting the puzzle pieces together, it seems like those things fit together, right? And if Baker is your choice, you mentioned the recruiting, but also it feels like you don't really have to. Would you fill a linebacker's role as a linebackers coach, or would he manage the linebackers and be your defensive coordinator? So if you're trying to save a little bit of scratch, you don't have to hire another on-field coach, right?
Well, yeah,
because he just shelled out how much in buyouts for the entire staff?
I believe it's like right under $6 million. What is it, $5.7 million?
I thought it was like 6.4. Oh no, 5.4.
$5.4 million, and then if you have to, I don't know what the buyout terms would be for Baker and what kind of contract you'd have to offer him, because
he just signed an extension.
He just signed a 7-figure deal at Missouri with a pact per public records that was set to pay Baker $1.1 million and increased by at least $100,000 through the year 2025.
Weren't they paying that house 1.5?
Yeah, but his buyout, I believe, in total is 3.7.
3.5
of that 5.4 that they owe. 3.5 of it goes to House.
Oh, Matthew.
And he was getting approximately $2 million per year, Matt House, and the school will owe House pending mitigation more than $3.5 million total after his dismissal.
So what are you saying? Pay Blake Baker 1.1.5?
Yeah, I mean, what's he making at Missouri?
1.1, right?
Was that what you said? 1.1?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, pay
1.5.
Yeah. I mean, just
get him here.
And let's not overthink it as well. I mean, LSU is a better job than Missouri. Has Drinkwitz done really good work of making Missouri relevant in the SEC at a time where it's very difficult to do so? He has. But when, in comparison's sake, if you lined up 10 football coaches and said, would you rather coach at LSU or Missouri? I believe 10 out of 10 would say I'd rather go to LSU. And if one said Missouri, you'd say, well, you're scared.
And I mean, if he looks at the linebacker class that's coming in, he would be, I'm sure he'd be elated.
Absolutely.
I mean, he was big in the Xavier Atkins recruitment too.
Everything.
So, he was trying to pull him to Missouri.
Exactly. So, he has some connections with the current recruiting class and some people on the team. So, it's almost like a no-brainer.
The fit makes sense.
It does.
And I don't know how long LSU is going to wait. If you want to talk to the cat up at Michigan, you'd have to wait until the national championship game ends. But it feels like with the momentum that's coming towards Baker, a Football Scoop released a story about it that I'm reading from. Like, obviously, you got the news yesterday from who's joining us with 247. Yeah, with Marcelo, and he was the first one to get it. And it just seems like whenever the ball started rolling with the firings, then the hiring was immediate. It felt like the name was immediately on the list. So it feels like this conversation, whether it be something that's been ongoing with putting Cory Raymond on staff, and he's kind of been in limbo as to what he was going to do. We talked about him changing his Twitter profile and his info straight back to DBU, which, I mean, obviously that feels like that's an LSU maybe puzzle. And then when you have Baker gets an extension, which could have been a play on his part from Missouri to up his deal, and then with him knowing maybe some knowledge that he's been talking to LSU. And so now you have leverage to be able to get even more money, which with agents in college football, that doesn't surprise me either. And LSU also has to pay an offensive coordinator or co-offensive coordinators.
Maybe.
Right.
depending on what the outcome is here. And we'll talk a little bit about the offensive side, and want to bring up something with Marcelo to get his take on it, because there was an interesting replacement or an interesting addition in the SEC that I think could have an effect on LSU, and may have already done so in some of the people that we have spoke to. Is Texas A&M has hired Alabama's wide receivers coach Holman Wiggins, and that happened earlier this week. Wiggins has been in Alabama for a while. I mean, he's been the coach of all of these guys, of Devonta Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle, and beyond. He was hired by Elko and A&M earlier this week, which opens up a wide receiver spot at the University of Alabama, with a possible a candidate. I know that Cortez Hankton's name has been kicked around a little bit as somebody that could be a possible target for Nick Saban in going after. So heads up and watch out on that. We'll ask Marcelo just about the likelihood or who some candidates may be. But obviously the topic and the headlines of the day is LSU defensively, what and where they go. And now that Baker has kind of emerged as the top candidate, and as we discussed, it makes a ton of sense, right? From a fit standpoint, from a familiarity standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. And then when you look at some of the things that, the boxes that you need to check to make sure that whoever is going to accept this job is qualified. First and foremost, I think that, the experience of being a coordinator is going to mean something, right? I don't necessarily know if there's more experimentation that can happen on the LSU defensive side of the ball, right? I mean, you looked at some things that, from a kind of a launch standpoint, that LSU was kind of hoping and praying that it would kind of work out. I mean, Robert Steeples didn't have a lot of experience. Matt House had been in the league in the SEC. Was coming off of a position coaching job in the NFL before he had called plays. Kerry Cooks had not been in the league before. I think familiarity with the SEC geographically being relevant, whether it having relationships in recruiting or just understanding how and what the way of the world of college football is in this part of the country, I believe is really going to mean something into filling this staff. Guys that have done it, have shown they can done it, have proven that they have done it. Guys like Cory Raymond. Bo Davis is a name that we continue to hear of somebody that is high on LSU's board, and somebody that they have really wanted to talk to and hope to bring him in as a part and have a role on the staff moving forward, however that may look. So, I think, the news wire for LSU is really just kind of getting cranked up of what's about to happen and how it's about to go down, from, just getting this staff replaced and, getting it done and filled so they can move forward. Really.
How much, does Brian Kelly have carte blanche to make this hire? Or would you think he's leaning on some other people? Maybe, I don't know if it's who that would be exactly, but you have to give him, I don't know, whatever. Some of this falls at his feet for hiring Steeples, Cooks, House, everyone, Lindsey, everyone that is leaving. Those are all his choices, right? Whenever he filled the staff. So I'm just wondering if it's, okay, we'll let you run it back and pick whoever you want again.
Well, I think I don't know if anybody in these roles from a head coaching standpoint ever really moves individually, like isolated.
Right.
It's a hell of a gamble to take all of that on. You want to do as much due diligence as you possibly can, and if you can lean on somebody, I believe for certain that Frank Wilson has meant a lot during this process. Of just kind of being a guy that has been in the SEC, understands the recruiting ground, understands why they're struggling in recruiting in certain areas, and understands what it takes from a pedigree standpoint to look for and what an effective SEC coach looks like. So, when you got that guy as the associate head coach of the program, and, from a just experience standpoint, Brian Kelly, has a ton of college football experience, not a lot down here in this part of the country. And I think over the last 2 years has had his eyes open to just how intense it is, right? I'm sure Notre Dame is a job in itself that opens your eyes to a lot of cool and new things around college football, just from a attention standpoint, a relevant standpoint. I mean, there's never going to be a time where Notre Dame is not getting attention and not relevant in college football. But you come down to the SEC, and the pressure cooker is just a little tighter.
It's just hotter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit smokier. I mean, there's a little bit more juice down here behind college football. And right, wrong, or indifferent, it's just the way that it is. And if you have an understanding of that, like a guy like Wilson does on staff, Cortez Hankton understands that. It's been in the league, is from here, from down in South Louisiana, knows, kind of the way of the world. I mean, it's easier to go in and say, look, this is what's missing. This is what's not. This is what you're losing from a competitive standpoint that the other schools have that you may not be able to overcome if you don't get these filled. So. I think that they're definitely using the resources that they have. They're using the administration who has done this before and been through these hires and understand how these things work. But yeah, ultimately, I believe Kelly says yes or no.
Right.
He's the one that's going to ultimately say
swing the axe.
Yeah, that's who it is.
Yeah, I would just imagine that. Yeah, you lead on it, and the more that staff changes have occurred over the last 2 years, the more you're starting to see that Louisiana flavor that you talk about, because everybody that he brought in before that, I think none of them they were all kind of his guys that had worked with him previously. Yeah. Bob Diaco is the only one that makes the.
Yeah, I feel like BK came in and he was more of like just trying to
recreate,
steady the ship, and then see if his guys would work out down here, and the ones that didn't. So now I got to get rid of you and find somebody that can work out.
Right. No, and I believe that's a pretty good assessment. That's you try to do it one way, it doesn't necessarily fit, and you have an understanding that this is the way that things have been done. Look, we've talked about this before. Brian Kelly was brought in specifically to overhaul LSU football. At the time that LSU football was taken over in leadership by Brian Kelly, it was lost. It was, for the first time since 1999, when LSU brought Nick Saban in, were they having and suffering a losing season. There was all sorts of turmoil in and around the program of things that were happening on the field and things that were happening off the field. I'm not going to go down and recount history on this. It's a simple Google search that you can look up and find. But it was just there was not a lot of good things happening around LSU football when Brian Kelly took over. So when he stepped in, he had a role, he had a responsibility to really correct that, right that, and he very much accomplished that. I still recall doing daily shows on this podcast about, the leadership council and the SWAT teams and the guys that were stepping up and the accountability and the things that were happening around the program that you were getting and seeing the buy-in. And then you go through the first season, you win the SEC West, you win 10 games. You've got some things that you can really point to and say there's some positive momentum of things that are happening and going in the right direction. Guys were in and around the community. There were, the stories were starting to change on what was happening with the team. And then in year 2, you got a Heisman Trophy winner. You've got, some things that are still positive that you can sell on the trail, but from a competitive standpoint, you got to make some changes if, year 3 is the real indicator of where the program is under the direction. And that's what I believe Kelly, is really recognizing. Like, look, you were tasked with getting the program headed in the right direction and shaking some of the fleas out and making sure and cleaning this place up from just an overall reputable standpoint. And he's done a great job at it. But you got to stay competitive on the field. You know, I mean, you still got to compete for championships. You still got to go out there and hire the best. You still have to go there and recruit the best. You got to get the best in the state. I mean, all of those things that have been constant for LSU football for the last 20 years, 23 years. I mean, today is the 20-year anniversary of the '03 national championship. 20 years ago today, you know, Saban, Spears, Clayton, rest in peace to Marquise Hill, Matt Malk, Justin Vincent. I mean, all those guys, Corey Webster, Travis Daniels, Jack Hunt, LaRon Landry, all celebrating that national championship that really got this thing off and moving in the direction where you look back and not only did you win 2 more natties, but you played for another one. I mean, this has been the golden age of LSU football, and one thing that has been constant is that you've dominated the state in recruiting. You've had a mentality about you to the defensive side of the ball that was a little bit different. And you know, I mean, really, it was done with the nucleus of it being from the state. Louisiana has always been the backbone of championship runs for LSU football. Don't start to overthink that stuff, right? I mean, that is what I think is setting in for Kelly of, yeah, you try to bring in some guys that had some good football experience, but not as much SEC experience, and that necessarily did not work out. And now you got to move in a direction that feels a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more normal to LSU football, where you got a mindset on the defensive side. You got guys out there, and Wolfgang Freud says, Jordy, what's the deal in your love with Cory Raymond? The last 4 years he was at LSU, there was some struggling. I'm not here to tell you that Cory Raymond is the top tier defensive backs coach in the country. I'm not here to sell that is the pitch on Raymond. If you look back, I mean, that there was some help. Dave Aranda looked at Cory Raymond and said, look, you bring Bill Bush in for the on-the-field development part in helping out on that. But one thing when you talk about Cory Raymond and his fit at LSU is that he knows how to sell the program. He knows how to get the guys and get the recruits. He knows how to bring in top-tier talent that, you know, necessarily is and has been the reputation and identity of the majority of the last 20 years
of LSU.
I mean, that has been the calling card. And, you know, I mean, you've seen it. Raymond's been on the open market for a while now. I mean, I don't hear a lot of, you know, Texas A&M's got openings. I mean, people have. You could go after Raymond if you wanted him. I think there's really one school that Raymond really fits and, you know, really makes a ton of sense, and I think that is LSU. And whether you can bring in the support around the on the field development, but what you get in Raymond is you start to attract that top tier talent again. That is the identity of the program, and you know, I mean, as Lloyd said, his byline on his social media account is DBU. LSU needs to get back to the days of the reputation and identity of the program being built around that position group, and you know, first round Pro Bowlers being in that room.
What is the what is the pushback on Raymond?
I'm seeing a lot of Chevis Jackson love in here, and I respect that too.
I would respect
but,
that, yeah.
I mean, can't you go, since you fired cornerback and safeties coach, can't you go Chevis Jackson and Cory Raymond?
You could. I don't know why you couldn't. I mean, you know, I don't.
And I'm sure Blake Baker wouldn't mind working with 2 dudes that have LSU ties and 2 LSU alums.
And I think that's what you need. You need to build an all-star staff.
Yeah.
You know, you need to build a staff that you know causes attention and people want to come after. And you know, I mean, there wasn't a lot of people knocking on the door to hire LSU's guys.
Yeah.
And you want that attention with your staff. Now, I mean, you don't want to get into a bidding war every single year and it be a huge distraction, but you want to make sure that you got the guys that are bringing the eyeballs to the program, and that can attract the talent. I think Cory Raymond does that, and it makes sense at LSU.